Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Behind the Garage Door. Today, Will and I are headed over to Lakeland to check out a very dynamic collection of vintage cars that we really think you're gonna like. So let's go. So we really wanted to take something cool and fast and fun and everything else since we're going to see vintage race cars, but weather's kind of bad, so next best thing, Silverado. Well, Will and I made it. We are here in Lakeland at this undisclosed warehouse location where we are meeting up with this gentleman right here, Ford Heacock. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Hi Norm, how are you?
I'm wonderful, thank you very much. Now, behind this particular garage door is an incredible collection of cars that I've had a very small glimpse of seeing, and you can't even say it's eclectic. It's a really neat collection of basically vintage race cars.
Well, the reason for that, Norm, is that I grew up in Sebring.
Okay.
I'm a native of Sebring. There aren't many of us around.
Makes sense.
And the Sebring race was a big part of our family when I was growing up. My grandfather was the chairman of that race in the early years.
Okay.
And
airplane.
And it was common for us to house drivers in our homes when I was growing up.
Okay.
I remember Pedro Rodriguez staying at our home when I was 10 or 11 years old.
Wow.
And so I enjoyed behind the ropes access at Sebring during the early years, the
Growing
50s and the 60s. And so, you know, that kind of instilled in me a passion for this hobby. And as I've reached a point in my life where I can afford some toys, I'm drawn to the race cars that I can relate to.
The ones that you grew up with,
the cars that I might have seen racing at Sebring, or in the case of one particular car, something that emulates one that raced at Sebring.
Fair enough. Well, that is like you said, there's not a lot of Sebring, Florida natives. So, and is there anything other than the track to do in Sebring?
Not really.
That's what I figured. Ford, thank you so much for having us out today. Now, we're going to step back and see what's behind the garage door. Okay, as we walk into your garage, Ford, obviously, this one I don't think that you saw as a kid when you were, out at Sebring at the racetrack. This is a what year Ford GT?
This is a 2005 Ford GT.
2005. Now, correct me. When did they first Ford originally introduce the GT?
Well, the original Ford GT.
That was the 60s, right?
That was in 63.
Okay.
And then. This car, which replicates the Ford GT40 very accurately, as a matter of fact, was built in 2005 and 2006.
Okay.
Roughly 4,000 were made. About 400 of those were yellow. And so this is one of the
It's a rare beast.
Rare beast. It's fully optioned. This was a car that 550 horsepower supercharged Cleveland V8. Producing, I said 550 horsepower, doing about 205 miles an hour out of the box.
How fast have you had it? Or do you want to say on camera?
Yeah. It's kind of like your financial statement. You don't want to say where you're at. You want to say, I'd say I'm in the upper range of that. But I didn't.
Buck 80-ish?
Yeah, buck 80.
Let's go there.
Okay, you nailed me.
All right. That's if you have a vehicle like this, and I'm assuming that you enjoy your cars. You don't just sit here and stare at them. You get them out and you drive them and you enjoy them.
Well, we do enjoy them. However, this car, I've kept the mileage low as now a 15-year-old vehicle.
16?
16-year-old vehicle. It's only got 2,800 miles.
Oh. Take it to the grocery store every once in a while. That's about
right.
it.
But some of those were pretty spirited miles.
As they should be. Absolutely, as they should be. Now, when did you buy this Ford GT?
It was, I think, late 06 or early 07.
So did you buy it from an owner or did you buy it new?
Well, a friend of mine, Steve Uterwick, owned the Mercedes dealership in Lakeland at the time. and he was involved in as a sponsor for the Lake Mirror Classic Auto Show, Auto Festival, which I was hosting, and he did a search for me. We found this car out in the Midwest, and it was a dealer car, and it had not been registered, and so we were basically able to buy it with about 100 miles on it.
Oh wow, wow, that's fantastic.
But this is, you know, I grew up in the, as I said, in Sebring, but I was around the garages before the race, during the week, when they'd be prepping the cars for the 12 hours.
Yeah.
And the Ford GT40, to me, was the ultimate expression of a long-distance endurance race car of that time. You know, it was to me perfect in every way. And when they built this car, I was ready to mortgage a significant part of my body just to get my hands on one.
Correct me if I'm wrong, the 40 and GT40 was the actual height.
Yeah, it was the roof height.
It was the roof height
of the vehicle. This car is about 44 inches.
Okay,
which
so
if you can envision that car sitting a little bit lower, it's hard to imagine how tight it might have been, but the GT40 was just a little bit lower than this car.
I would imagine that they had to raise it up just enough for taller guys to get in it.
People like you and I.
Absolutely. Now these doors, can you open up one of the doors real quick?
Well, these are real forehead busters. You know, a lot of times people are getting in and out of this car. Well, this will catch them right on the forehead.
Well, you need this void right here just to probably get in it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. This thing is immaculate. It's perfect.
Well, we've kept it pretty tidy. The door sill on the other side is signed by Sir Sterling Moss.
It is.
And Bobby Allison, who were both guests of honor at the Lake Mirror Classic.
That's fantastic.
Years ago.
That is fantastic. So this is a significant vehicle in your collection, no doubt about that. And you've got some significant vehicles.
Well, thank you, Norm. Really, this was a car that, when it came to being built, I was like, I got to do this. I got to
have it.
You know,
you grew up with them, so.
It was a big hit for me at that time, but worth it in every way.
As we move down Ford's garage here, we come up to the next vehicle that, I got to be honest, my knowledge of vintage racing vehicles, I'm glad you're here, because my knowledge of vintage racing vehicles is not very good. But I do notice that this is an Austin Healey. Give me the backstory and why you needed number 67 here.
Well, the Austin Healey factory in the late 50s started a program based on small displacement race cars, and Sebring was very important to them, so they built these cars called the Sebring Sprite. And they would build a small number of Sebring Sprite prototypes each year, bring them to Sebring to showcase what they could do. And they hired top name drivers to drive these cars. Sterling Moss, Ennis Ireland, Briggs Cunningham, were drivers that would have driven for Austin Healey in these Sebring Sprites. Generally in the 4-hour endurance race that took place the day before the 12 hours of Sebring. And they did quite well. They generally, particularly in the late 50s, they were winning and they were making an international name for Austin Healey. So it really was great. They also would enter these cars in the 12 hours of Sebring. So in 1964, this car was entered for Donna Mae Mims, who was the first female driver to ever win an SCCA national championship. So she was...
This car?
This car.
Okay.
So Donna Mae was a renowned race car driver, and female, and her co-driver was a Formula One driver, Al Pease, a Canadian. And so they had a great driver lineup for this car. Unfortunately, it only completed 9 laps, and the rear axle broke. There was a dip off of the big bend at Sebring that we think what happened was Al Pease dropped a wheel into that dip, and it probably caused the rear end to break. So it didn't finish the race, but to me, just owning a Sebring Sprite is special, but in particular, this car is all original, down to every nut and bolt, including the magnesium wheels that were on this car in 1964. So we only use the magnesium wheels for shows because you don't want to drive a 50-year-old magnesium wheel.
Right.
But the The engine in this car is an 1100 cc prototype engine that it was capable of pushing this car to 130 miles an hour.
Look at that little thing.
And this is a little 4-cylinder, 1100 cc Weber carburation, dry sump engine that, and the serial number on this car is, well, it's
015?
stamped on the other
Oh, okay.
side, but it's one of the XSP engines, which the engine itself is worth quite a bit of money just because of it being a prototype.
So it's got the valve clearance
Yep.
on the top of the valve cover. Set rockers to 015 valve clearance when hot.
Yep.
That is something else.
But this car is all original, and
Did you see this car race?
I would have seen this car race. I don't remember seeing the car race, but I would have been at the Sebring race in 1964.
I gotcha.
I would have been hanging over the fence,
Yep.
and I would have been dreaming of owning one of those cars someday, but not knowing which one would.
Well, the other thing that I just noticed, it's right-hand drive.
It is right-hand drive, and it's a beautiful little car.
Wow.
It's a screamer. It's a fun car to drive.
So these are the magnesium wheels that are on it now?
The wheels that are on the car today are a reproduction wheel that are steel, but we have the magnesium wheels. And we showed this car at Amelia Island a year ago, and we had the magnesium wheels on it for that show. And we're going to probably show it at the Boca Raton Concours d'Elegance in February of this coming year.
I bet this car does wonderful at those shows.
Well, it draws a lot of attention for people that understand what the Sebring Sprite
Right,
represented.
right.
And it definitely is a cult following in Europe for the small displacement Austin Healey Sebring Sprite.
Yeah, they have to love this car.
We've got the car numbered up just exactly as it was at race day at Sebring in 1964.
Raced 167, huh? As we move down the row of cars here, Ford, the Porsche, or I'm sorry, do you say Porsche?
Porsche.
Let's get that right. Let's move on to this and tell me the story behind this. This is obviously a full-on race car. I see roll cage in there and everything.
Well, this car I acquired about 10 years ago from a retired Air Force General Dennis Ledbetter in Savannah, Georgia. And Dennis was a big Porsche file, vintage racer. So this car was built in the early 70s by Club Sport. And they're known for making, taking a production Porsche and converting it to a full-on race car.
And this is a Porsche 911?
No, this is a 356.
356, I should have known that.
1960.
Okay.
And it's got a little 1600 4-cylinder engine, but it's a hoot to drive. I've been campaigning this car in vintage racing for about 10 years.
So you actually race this car?
Yeah, I still race it today. I raced it at Sebring earlier this year. I've raced it at Indianapolis, rode Atlanta,
Really?
Pittsburgh, you know, so, and it's a...
When you say Indianapolis, at the track?
Yep,
The big track?
the big track.
Okay, now I have to ask, those cars that are designed to go on that track will tack out at what, 10,000, 11,000 RPMs?
Yeah.
How you doing when you finally get to the curve in this?
Well, like on one of my other cars, there's a place where I can go flat out around some of those cars. But this, we go there and we, with the Vintage Race Club, SVRA, which I founded in 1980, host an annual vintage weekend at Indianapolis, and it's great. We get a large group of cars, and we race on the Formula One circuit.
Okay.
Which is
The road track.
yeah, that
road
goes
course.
clockwise around the track and uses the infield as opposed to the open wheel racers, which go counterclockwise around the track.
Kind of like the same thing they do at Daytona.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
But they generally give us a session or two where we can use the open Indy track
has to be
going
cool.
counterclockwise, and that's fun.
I've actually gone a lap on the Indianapolis 500 track, but it was in the tour bus,
Yeah.
so I really didn't do it. But I have done it.
Yeah.
I was just riding along in a bus.
This has been a very popular car because it's good looking and it's a hoot to drive.
Does it really run on jet fuel?
No, that was a tribute to Dennis Ledbetter. He was an Air Force pilot.
All makes
And
sense now.
so that's why he put the jet fuel only sticker on there to kind of tease people.
So what's the best lap time and the best car best track you've ever ran this car at?
Well, you know, I've gotten very comfortable at Sebring in this car because I've probably spent more laps at Sebring than anywhere in this car, and so I enjoy racing at Sebring. And you know, despite what people may say about the bumps, you know, you get used to them.
You know exactly where they're at.
So I've enjoyed the car, and we'll continue to campaign it. This year, because of COVID, we really haven't had it out. Probably will get it out again next spring.
That'll be fun.
We did take it out. I take that back. We took it out in February of 2021 to Sebring and did a weekend with it there and did fine.
Runs good every time you bring it out, huh?
Well, that's the thing. It's bulletproof. It's pretty, you know, about all we need to do when we take it to the track is put air in the tires.
1960 356.
Yep.
Nice. Ford, I have to be honest with you. The car that we're going to talk about now is probably, well, it's hard to choose, but only because when I was a kid, there was a guy down the street from us that had a green Sunbeam. It was a Tiger. I don't know if this one is a Tiger or not.
Yep.
Okay, so his had, I mean, it wasn't even the 260, it was a 289. And I always was so baffled by this little tiny car making this big noise. Yeah. So tell me about this Sunbeam.
Well, this is a 1961 Sunbeam Alpine Harrington.
Okay.
Now, all of the Sunbeams built in that time period were roadsters. There were no hardtops.
Okay.
So there was a company in England named Harrington that came out and arranged for Alpine to build hardtops for them. And they found that as a race car, the hardtop did better because it's more streamlined.
Sure.
This car was built for an Italian by the name of Marchese Theodoli. And Theodoli was an Italian nobleman who immigrated to the United States in the late 40s, and he was a gentleman racer. He raced Sebring and club races in the Northeast, and so he went to Sunbeam in '61 and commissioned this car exactly the way you see it today, and he raced it at Sebring in 1962 as a team member of the Alpine race team, which was owned by Roots Motor Company, built the Alpine cars, and they raced at Sebring. And the sister car to this on that team was Ken Miles and Lou Spencer.
Okay.
And so I have a very vicarious connection to Ken Miles via this car. And
6 degrees.
But they did well. They finished in their class, and they finished the race. I think the finishing position for this car in '62 was in 33rd or 34th position.
But it finished.
But it finished, that's right. And but the interesting story came in 1963 because Theodoli was in the marketing business, and two of his accounts were the Alitalia Airlines and Ferrari. And Alitalia happened to be the major sponsor for the 12 Hours of Sebring. And he was buddies with Luigi Canetti, who ran the North American racing team for Ferrari. And so they were both accounts of his. And Luigi Canetti invited him to come to Sebring in '63 as a guest of the North American racing team, Ferrari. And so if you move around, you can see the Ferrari logos on the side of this car.
Okay.
Because it's probably the only British car to ever wear the Ferrari prancing horse emblem. And so this car is...
with an American flag above it.
Yeah. Well, that's the North American racing team emblem.
Okay.
So this logo stands for North American Racing Team. It's the Ferrari North American
Gotcha.
entity. And so this car was a member of that team. It came to Sebring on the transporter with the Ferraris. It was garaged with the Ferraris. It was serviced by the Ferrari mechanics. They put a Ferrari seat in it. The blue seat was from a Ferrari 250 Testarossa. And they put a larger fuel tank in it. And so this car really is important to me because of that connection to 1963. Wow. I'm real proud of this car. We showed this at Amelia Island this year in 2021, and we'll be showing it at other events, around the Southeast as occasions permit.
Well, as I look at the front of this car, the Sunbeam that I remember from a kid, the front end is very similar to that.
Yeah.
the roof in the back of it is completely different. This car has like fins, like
Yeah.
a '57 Chevy does,
Yep.
and the sloping top. I don't recall that
Well,
the Tiger being like this.
They say that some of the inspiration for this design was like the 55 T-Bird. And if you think of that, you do see the fins.
Yep.
This car is powered by a little 4-cylinder, 1600 engine, 4-cylinder with side draft Webers.
That you can tell that you just brought this from Amelia Island.
Yeah,
Wow.
this is a nice set of wheels.
So we've seen a lot of red cars as we've gone down through here, and we finally make it to a different color car, and what a beautiful Jaguar this is.
Thanks.
The story behind this one, please, Ford.
Well, this car, I was always an Austin Healey guy, and I had owned a number of large Healeys, the 3000, 104, etc. And at one point, I had sold my last Austin Healey, and I was having, seller's remorse, I guess. And I talked to my buddy Paul Sekuris, and I said, Paul, if you hear of any Jaguars coming up, I'd love to find an old XK 120 and do something with it. And he directed me to a gentleman who was a retired Eastern Airline pilot living on the airstrip in Mulberry. There's a grass airstrip there. And he had an airplane hangar, and I went down and met him. He had this car, and it was pretty rough. It was a driver, and it had not been restored, but it was all there.
This is the car you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
And so I bought the car and drove it for 4 or 5 years. And then I approached Paul Sekuris, who's based up in Kathleen. And he's known nationally for his restoration work. And I don't know if you know Paul, but his cars have won major shows all over the country. And he is just one of the best. And he can take a car like this, and as you can see, he'd do a very good job. But this 1950 Jaguar Xk 120 is powered by a big straight 6, roughly 3 liter. I'm trying to remember my displacement all of a sudden, but this car was shown also at Amelia Island in 2012. The funny story on this car is that I chose to have Paul to restore it on the pay-as-you-go plan.
It's okay.
One of those deals where he'll send me a statement every few months, and he'll work on it for a while, and then he'll move to another project, and he'll come back and forth, and knowing that I didn't have to fund the thing all at once. And so we went along with this for quite a while, and one day he called and he said, Ford, I'm ready to take it out for a test drive. He said, I need you to go get an updated tag because the tag is expired on this car. It was then that I realized he had had it for 7 years. So it was a 7-year restoration.
Well, if you're going to do it right, and clearly, I mean, you can tell when a car has been restored. Some of them will be restored and they start falling apart a year later.
Yeah.
This one was restored 10 years ago, and it still looks like you just took it off the trailer from where it was restored.
Paul's work is spectacular and it's lasting. He does just incredible work. I'll show you under the hood. And by the way, Paul and his wife do all of their own interiors, and but the interior on this car is just exquisite.
Yes, it is. Again, it looks like you just came from Amelia Island.
Yep.
Unbelievable.
And these big 6-cylinder Jaguars just make an incredible, sound.
Yes.
And this thing drives like a sewing machine. We've shown it at Amelia, we've shown it at Lake Mirror, we've shown it at the Gasparilla show in Tampa. It also won Best in Show at the Miami International Auto Show around 2014 or 15. So we've taken it on some road tours. We've had it up at the Kiowa Island Concours.
You've actually put road miles on this car.
Yeah, when we showed it at the Gasparilla show, we drove it over and drove it back.
Now, typically, I mean, I know, now, don't get me wrong, this is obviously not a driver, but when you drive a car, at some point, especially with a restoration this old, you're going to see a bug, rock chip, anything, and there is nothing anywhere on this car.
Yeah, it's held up very well, and I've had people try to buy it, but I can't put a number on it.
I don't
Mainly
blame you.
because I don't know what that 7-year bill was. I never added them up.
Clearly, neither one of us can do math, so, so I don't even know if you want to add up that bill.
I never added up the bills.
Oh, my
I don't want
goodness.
to, but to me, it's just an exquisite automobile. And I always like the roadster design, because if you look at the cockpit of this car, you don't see any top components that are piled up behind the driver.
That's right. So this is a true roadster.
In a roadster, the top is removed, and it stows in a compartment behind the seats.
So in case you do get caught in the rain.
It's like putting up a pop tent.
Okay.
A pup tent. What do you call it?
Pup tent.
Pup tent.
Pup tent, yeah. But it's probably, this car is going to be attractive no matter what,
Yeah.
but it's probably more attractive with the top down.
Yeah, well, I think the roadster design is the purest design, the XK 120, 140 line, and this car to me is a classic, and it'll stay in our collection.
Did it come original with an aluminum radiator?
No.
Okay.
The original radiators were brass.
That's what I thought.
And when we restored this car, Paul's recommendation was to go to aluminum because we're in Florida, and the brass radiators did not perform as well.
Does that ding you on points?
It does with some judges, but others recognize why you do it. Now, we can always use we can slip in a brass radiator if we're going to a show where they're going to be picky about that.
Yeah. All right, Ford, we come up to the last vehicle in your incredible collection, and actually the second right-hand drive car.
That's right.
Who has two right-hand drive cars in their collection. This one coming back to America and clearly has been a race car for a very long time. Give me the history behind the Silver Bullet.
Well, the Lake Mirror Classic, which I hosted for 20 years, one year this car was being shown at Lake Mirror. A fellow by the name of Ray Morgan from Atlanta was showing this car, and I was just drawn to it. I thought, man, that's got a lot of character, and it's just a fun car to be, look at.
Sure.
And so Ray and I had become friends through the vintage racing hobby, and I told him, I said, Ray, if you ever decide to let that car go, I hope you'll let me know. Well, don't you know, those are magic words, right? So it wasn't too long. He called me one day and he said, trying to clear some space in my building, I think I could let that car go. So we came to a number, and I bought it from Ray Morgan. Ray had found this car in Sweden. He went to Europe looking for a car he could race in America in the pre-war category of vintage racing. And so he bought this car in Sweden and imported it back to the States.
Let me interrupt you there real quick. So this car was bought in Sweden and brought back to the States, and it's a Ford.
It's a Ford. We don't know what happened was when it was changing hands, he bought the car through a broker rather than an owner. So the history prior to that was vague.
Okay.
All we know is it had campaigned in the European vintage race circuit, racing against Bugattis and Ferraris and early pre-war cars. And we believe the car was probably built in Europe instead of here, as far as being built as a race car.
I got you.
Now, it started life, obviously, as a Ford Model A.
Mm-hmm.
So
1929? Okay.
Ford Model A, and now known as a Speedster because of the body style. It's got the Model B engine in it, a little four-bang flathead
yep.
engine, and it's a hoot. I've raced this at Indianapolis. Tell people that I can go flat out. In turn one at Indianapolis, I don't have to lift.
Nope. Just kind of.
And I can wave at the crowd.
So what's the top? Well, I got to ask now. So you're going into turn one at Indianapolis at
probably 60 or
65.
That's with a tailwind.
And a half a tank of fuel.
So we had some real fun with this car a couple of years ago. Jay Leno was going to be performing a show at the Lakeland Center, and the Lakeland Center staff called and they said, Jay Leno's going to be in town. Do you have an old car that might be appropriate for him to come driving in town in?
I can see your wheels
I said,
turning.
Well, matter of fact, I do. I've got just the car for that. So I pulled this out on the tarmac at the airport when he came in his jet, and he's walking down the gangplank of his airplane, and so he immediately
Drawn straight to it. Moth to a
straight
flame.
to the car, and I said, "Hey, Jay," and I'm introducing myself to him, and he's not even looking at me. He's going right for the car. I said, "Would you like to drive?" "Oh, hell yeah!" And so he climbs in, and we head to town. And the request of me was to get him to the Terrace Hotel, where he was basically going to relax for the afternoon before his show and kind of prepare. Well, we're headed into town. I said, "Jay, have you had lunch?" "No, what do you want to do?" I said, "Well, let's stop at Grasslands and have lunch." Well, he and I go walking into the grill room at lunch. It's filled with the golfers, and they just all about fell out of their chair.
I bet they did.
And he was so gracious for 2 hours. He sat there and just, you know, he hobnobbed with all of us, telling jokes and stories and engaging with people that at every level. The kitchen staff came out at one point to have a picture taken with him. Of course, he does that.
He's very generous with his time, I've heard.
And the dishwasher went home and got his 52 Chevy Rat Rod.
Nice.
Brought it up to the parking lot, and it was a pretty rough looking car. But Jay went out and they got the hood up on that car, and the two of them are under there talking about, and Jay made this guy feel like a prince.
Yeah.
And that was just a touching moment. And
if it's got four wheels and makes noise,
yeah,
he's into it.
He's a great guy.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed spending a little bit of time with him.
He probably's into unicycles.
Yeah. But everywhere you go with this car, it gets a lot of grins.
Is it street legal?
Yeah, it's tagged for the street.
Nice.
And it's a good parade car, but also it's a fun car to show. And we'd like to do the road tour, the road rallies in it around here. When Ray Craigbaum does his road rallies, this is perfect for that.
See, now you saying that as opposed to that, talking about the Jaguar and taking it on a road rally. This I can see taking on a road rally because it's got some road rash on it and it's got, a couple of cracks in the paint and stuff like that. This is a fantastic representation of not only the cool old vintage race cars, but something that you can get out and take on a 100-mile trip or whatever else.
My son Justin and I will put on our dusters that's got the big logo on the back.
The goggles.
And we'll put on the goggles and the leather caps, and we'll show up and be kind of the center of attention for a few minutes. But it's a hoot.
Number 4.
Yeah.
Love it. Ford, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your collection of amazing cars with us, with really awesome racing heritage and everything else. The cars are just amazing. 2005 Ford GT. The Austin Healey is a 64. The Porsche is a 60. The Sunbeam Tiger is a 62.
61.
61.
Close.
Okay, I forgot. We just talked about the Jaguar, and I can't remember the 53, and then the 28 Ford.
29.
I'm not gonna say I'm no good. The guy has too many cars to remember, and all of them are amazing. I'm trying to think of all the cool stuff about all of them, and I can't. I'm just glad that we got this on video. And Ford, thank you so much.
Yeah.
We're gonna head back to the dealership now and reflect a little bit. All right, we are back from Lakeland. Thank you so much, Ford, for sharing that amazing collection of vintage race cars. I have my personal favorite, which was, I'm gonna go with the Sunbeam. What was yours? Hit us up in the comments. Was it the Ford GT? Was it the Porsche? Was it the Austin Healey? Maybe that amazingly clean Jaguar? Let us know in the comments, and make sure you subscribe and hit us back every Thursday. There'll be another episode of Behind the Garage Door, so check back.
Stingray Chevrolet, relax, enjoy the day.